The rap world is currently witnessing the violent reignition of one of its most bitter, long-standing feuds, as 50 Cent and Rick Ross lock horns in a high-stakes psychological war over financial legitimacy and personal prestige. For over 15 years, these two industry titans have traded venomous barbs, but the digital landscape was recently thrown into absolute chaos following a viral, unconfirmed photograph on platform X that appeared to show the biggest boss himself boarding a commercial flight rather than traveling via his signature private aviation. For an artist who has fundamentally anchored his entire multi-million-dollar brand, Maybach Music Group empire, and street credibility around an illusion of untouchable, astronomical wealth, this single image acted as immediate, devastating ammunition for his detractors. The internet timeline instantly erupted into ruthless mockery, with millions of fans and armchair financial analysts aggressively speculating that the visual was a glaring symptom of profound, behind-the-scenes financial bleeding and an inability to maintain the crushing overhead costs of his ultra-luxury lifestyle. Never one to let a viral vulnerability go unpunished, 50 Cent seized the moment with his signature brand of weaponized trolling, instantly amplifying the rumors to paint his rival's empire as a crumbling house of cards. This public exposure forced an incredibly defensive Rick Ross to launch a fierce, multi-front digital counteroffensive to protect his legacy, permanently shattering the fragile peace between the two moguls and setting off a volatile chain reaction across the entire hip-hop community. The rap world is currently witnessing the violent reignition of one of its most bitter, long-standing feuds, as 50 Cent and Rick Ross lock horns in a high-stakes psychological war over financial legitimacy and personal prestige. For over 15 years, these two industry titans have traded venomous barbs, but the digital landscape was recently thrown into absolute chaos following a viral, unconfirmed photograph on platform X that appeared to show the biggest boss himself boarding a commercial flight rather than traveling via his signature private aviation. For an artist who has fundamentally anchored his entire multi-million-dollar brand, Maybach Music Group empire, and street credibility around an illusion of untouchable, astronomical wealth, this single image acted as immediate, devastating ammunition for his detractors. The internet timeline instantly erupted into ruthless mockery, with millions of fans and armchair financial analysts aggressively speculating that the visual was a glaring symptom of profound, behind-the-scenes financial bleeding and an inability to maintain the crushing overhead costs of his ultra-luxury lifestyle. Never one to let a viral vulnerability go unpunished, 50 Cent seized the moment with his signature brand of weaponized trolling, instantly amplifying the rumors to paint his rival's empire as a crumbling house of cards. This public exposure forced an incredibly defensive Rick Ross to launch a fierce, multi-front digital counteroffensive to protect his legacy, permanently shattering the fragile peace between the two moguls and setting off a volatile chain reaction across the entire hip-hop community. This explosive counteroffensive began the exact moment the viral airport photograph bypassed casual hip-hop blogs and was aggressively amplified by veteran rapper and 50 Cent affiliate, Uncle Murda. Seizing the opportunity to apply maximum public pressure, Uncle Murda shared the trending post on his Instagram story, effectively weaponizing the visual of Ross sitting in a crowded terminal among everyday travelers. The implication was clear: the grand facade of the biggest boss had finally collapsed under the economic weight of a changing music industry. Rick Ross, recognizing the severe threat this posed to his lucrative brand identity, wasted no time launching an unfiltered, multi-video retaliation across his social media channels. Rather than ignoring the noise, Ross attempted to completely flip the narrative by transforming a perceived financial embarrassment into an aggressive demonstration of extreme wealth. In a series of defiant videos recorded from his sprawling estate, Ross claimed that his absence from private aviation was entirely due to a voluntary, high-priced upgrade rather than a lack of capital. He asserted that his luxury private jet was temporarily grounded to undergo a massive, $500,000 technical overhaul, specifically to install advanced Starlink satellite Wi-Fi. Mocking his critics for their lack of understanding regarding high-end asset maintenance, Ross boasted that his commercial flight to Colombia to party with Trick Daddy was an intentional, grounded choice made by a mature businessman, who remains unbothered by traveling among the public. To further minimize the backlash, he launched a barrage of highly personal insults at Uncle Murder, mocking his physical appearance, his dental health, and his lifestyle, even offering to pay for a free dental cleaning for Murder and his entire family as a display of financial superiority. However, this defensive posture only provided more fuel for 50 Cent, who historically operates as a master coordinator of digital psychological warfare. Refusing to accept Ross's Starlink explanation, 50 Cent immediately integrated the commercial flight controversy into his long-running public campaign against Ross's legitimacy. He aggressively directed the public's attention back to another viral talking point that has continuously amused the internet: Ross's habit of personally operating a heavy-duty John Deere tractor to mow the extensive 400-acre lawn of his legendary Promised Land mansion in Fayetteville, Georgia. In a sequence of scathing social media roasts, 50 Cent explicitly framed this domestic upkeep not as a therapeutic hobby, but as a desperate, cost-cutting measure implemented by a man drowning in astronomical property taxes and severe overhead maintenance costs. 50 Cent's tactical angle cuts straight to the core of Ross's career-defining vulnerability, a structural weakness he first exposed to the hip-hop community back in 2008. By repeatedly questioning what kind of genuine 100-millionaire is forced to cut his own grass and fly commercial with everyday passengers, 50 Cent is actively attempting to dismantle the larger-than-life street persona that Ross has monetised for nearly 2 decades. He continually resurrects the highly controversial revelation that before finding mainstream success under the moniker of real-life drug kingpin Freeway Ricky Ross, William Leonard Roberts too spent years working as a uniformed correctional officer in a Florida prison. For 50 Cent, every modern financial rumor is simply validation of his original thesis, that Rick Ross is an elaborate, corporate-sponsored fictional character whose real-world bank accounts have never matched the criminal opulence described in his lyrics. This systematic dismantling of his financial reputation provoked an incredibly sharp, retaliatory strike from Ross, who chose to strike back by targeting 50 Cent's own historical legal and financial vulnerabilities. Reopening a deeply sensitive chapter in the G-Unit mogul's history, Ross publicly revisited 50 Cent's highly publicized 2015 Chapter 11 bankruptcy filing. In a sequence of heated media appearances and podcast interviews, Ross claimed that during their intense past legal battles, his own high-powered attorneys successfully forced a full disclosure of 50 Cent's personal banking records. Ross alleged that the financial discovery process painted a shockingly barren picture of 50 Cent's actual liquid net worth, asserting that the man who famously built an empire on the slogan, "Get rich or die trying," was secretly living in a modest 2-bedroom apartment while his actual capital was tied up in crushing court-ordered debts. Ross pushed the corporate warfare even further by aggressively targeting 50 Cent's current, highly celebrated business ventures outside of music. Pointing to 50 Cent's massive success as an investigative television producer, specifically his highly rated documentary projects exposing the legal downfall and dark secrets of Sean Diddy Combs, Ross attempted to completely minimize his rival's corporate leverage. He claimed that major television networks and streaming platforms are simply using 50 Cent's controversial public name as a cheap marketing tool, paying him minor, flat 5-figure production fees while retaining full institutional ownership of the master creative assets. Ross proudly contrasted this alleged corporate exploitation with his own independent business portfolio, boasting about his 25 active partnerships, his multi-million-dollar Maybach Music Group catalog, and his extensive, high-yielding Wingstop restaurant franchises that consistently generate generational wealth entirely under his own control. As the corporate mudslinging between the two multimillionaires escalates, the deep-seated personal animosity has begun to completely overpower standard industry boundaries, dragging their respective families into the crossfire. The most toxic escalation of the entire feud occurred when Ross crossed a universally recognized line of hip-hop etiquette, launching a direct, public swipe at 50 Cent's late mother, who tragically lost her life in a fire during his early childhood. Intertwining her tragic memory with a complex commentary on current rap dynamics and industry collaborations involving Atlanta rapper T.I., Ross asserted that 50 Cent was operating under a dark, traumatic spiritual cloud. This deeply personal violation shattered any lingering possibility of a corporate truce, proving that despite the massive evolution of the modern music business, where veteran performers are forced to aggressively diversify their portfolios to survive the lower profit margins of the streaming era, the primitive, unyielding hatred between these two men remains completely unchanged since the day it began. With neither mogul willing to yield an inch of psychological territory, the entire hip-hop community remains completely transfixed, watching a brutal war of attrition unfold in real time. The breaking of that structural boundary did more than just shock the casual consumer. It permanently shifted the psychological landscape of the entire feud, driving both moguls into a frantic, high-stakes sprint to consolidate their public narratives before the digital court of opinion closed its doors. The introduction of ancestral trauma into a battle originally fought over bank statements signaled that the conflict had outgrown the standard parameters of marketing or corporate posturing. It had degenerated into a zero-sum game of social survival. Following Ross's inflammatory statements regarding 50 Cent's late mother, the digital ecosystem braced for a retaliatory strike that would inevitably transcend the internet. Yet, instead of reacting with an immediate, chaotic outburst of standard internet rage, 50 Cent deployed a far more insidious, highly calculated counter-strategy. Drawing from a psychological playbook he perfected during his legendary industry wars of the early 2000s, he chose to completely starve Ross of the direct, aggressive confrontation he was clearly fishing for. Instead of validating the deeply personal insult with a frantic video response, 50 Cent orchestrated a systematic digital blackout, utilizing his massive media platforms to amplify separate, unrelated financial reports that subtly verified his original claims regarding Ross's alleged economic instability. He began silently sharing independent entertainment blogs and financial breakdowns detailing the sharp decline in live concert attendance for several veteran hip-hop performers, letting the mathematical reality of the modern streaming market do the heavy lifting for him. This analytical warfare directly exposed the structural vulnerabilities that all legacy artists face in a landscape completely dominated by digital algorithms rather than physical distribution. During his undisputed peak era between 2008 and 2014, a golden run defined by cinematic, chart-topping albums like Port of Miami, Triller, and Teflon Don, Rick Ross could reliably count on massive, upfront financial windfalls generated by physical album sales and lucrative corporate radio tours. However, as music consumption completely shifted toward digital streaming platforms, the baseline economics of the entire rap industry were fundamentally re-engineered. Financial analysts have consistently pointed out that under the contemporary streaming model, an artist requires hundreds of millions of consistent plays just to generate a fraction of the liquid capital that a successful physical release once guaranteed. By weaponizing these stark industry shifts, 50 Cent sought to convince the public that Ross's ultra-luxury lifestyle was running on an unsustainable, outdated financial engine. He kept the public spotlight fixed on the staggering overhead costs required to maintain an asset like the Promised Land estate, subtly reminding his audience that a 400-acre property carries astronomical, recurring property taxes, landscaping fees, and structural maintenance bills that do not adjust downward just because streaming margins have shrunk. The strategic implication was clear. The public display of cutting his own grass with a John Deere tractor was not an eccentric display of billionaire humility, but a desperate, mathematical necessity for an aging artist trying to keep a massive, hollow empire from buckling under its own weight. This relentless pressure forced Ross deeper into a public relations corner, causing his defensive reactions to grow increasingly grandiose and erratic. Desperate to prove that his liquid capital remained completely unaffected by the changing industry dynamics, Ross launched an ostentatious display of financial dominance across his social media channels, inviting cameras into his ultra-exclusive Star Island property in Miami. Adopting his classic, unshakable biggest boss persona, Ross began aggressively flaunting his diversified business portfolio, attempting to shift the narrative away from music sales and toward his real-world corporate investments. He boasted of owning over 25 active corporate ventures and partnerships, explicitly highlighting his highly lucrative international business trips to luxury hubs like Dubai, alongside his high-yielding domestic franchises. To completely dismantle the rumors of his alleged financial decline, Ross went on a high-profile media tour, appearing on prominent hip-hop podcasts, to directly address the public speculation surrounding his net worth. When confronted with standard online celebrity net worth estimators that placed his personal wealth at approximately $150 million, Ross openly laughed at the figures, confidently telling the hosts that such internet metrics were comically lower than his actual financial reality. He mockingly claimed that the individuals managing those database updates clearly had no access to the elite international bankers he handles his wealth through, declaring that his financial infrastructure was built far beyond standard retail banking institutions. During a highly publicized appearance on a podcast hosted by Fat Joe, the underlying tension of the feud threatened to spill over into a physical confrontation when Ross openly fantasized about taking a massive, million-dollar diamond ring off his finger and using it to physically strike 50 Cent across the face. The aggressive, unfiltered display immediately sent shockwaves through social media, forcing a visibly uncomfortable Fat Joe to step in and de-escalate the moment on camera, warning Ross that he was taking the online trolling entirely too far and attempting to manufacture a dangerous conflict out of thin air. But Ross refused to back down, doubling down on his hostility by launching into a scathing critique of 50 Cent's long-standing musical catalog, claiming that his rival hadn't been capable of crafting a genuine hit record since he lost the direct studio backing of elite multi-platinum producers like Dr. Dre and Eminem. This relentless war of attrition has effectively split the global hip-hop community into two deeply divided, heavily entrenched ideological camps. On one side, loyal supporters of Rick Ross vehemently argue that the internet is reading entirely too much into a handful of isolated, unconfirmed viral moments, passionately defending the mogul as a master hustler who successfully transitioned from a legendary music career into a highly sophisticated, diversified corporate executive. They maintain that a brief commercial flight or a therapeutic afternoon spent tending to his own historical estate are completely normal behaviors for a secure, self-made billionaire who has absolutely nothing left to prove to the public. Conversely, 50 Cent's massive digital following views the entire unfolding drama as a masterclass in psychological exposure, firmly believing that their favorite artist has once again successfully baited a rival into exposing the fragile, manufactured nature of his public persona. They argue that Ross's intense, overly defensive reactions and his sudden willingness to cross sacred personal boundaries are the classic behavioral symptoms of an individual whose financial realities are slowly starting to catch up with his theatrical marketing. Ultimately, the absolute truth of the situation remains locked behind the secure, heavily guarded corporate balance sheets that only Rick Ross and his elite financial managers have access to. Yet, within the brutal, unforgiving arena of hip-hop culture, the actual financial data is often entirely secondary to the raw power of public perception. Because Ross spent nearly 2 decades anchoring his entire artistic identity, human value, and legacy around an illusion of boundless, untouchable opulence, even the slightest aesthetic shift in his lifestyle becomes a potentially fatal vulnerability. With 50 Cent openly declaring to his millions of followers that he has no intention of stopping and is actively destroying his rival's life purely for personal entertainment, this legendary, 15-year-old corporate warfare has evolved into a fascinating, high-stakes psychological drama where reputation, cultural relevance, and the survival of a legacy are fought for in real time, frame by digital frame. The digital court of public opinion, however, refused to let the spectacle rest, as the psychological chess match between the two titans entered its final, most volatile phase. The battlefield shifted from vague corporate posturing to a relentless, granular autopsy of their respective street legacies, with both fan bases weaponizing historical archives to permanently tip the scales. 50 Cent, sensing that Ross was growing increasingly unstable under the weight of the commercial flight narrative, delivered what many considered a masterful, silent coup de grace. Instead of continuing the explicit back-and-forth insults, he began quietly securing rights and expanding his television empire, demonstrating an elite level of corporate movement that made internet videos look incredibly amateur by comparison. This structural divergence highlights the ultimate paradox of modern hip-hop longevity. While Rick Ross spent his week frantically proving his liquid net worth by standing in front of physical mansions and screaming about international wire transfers, 50 Cent was executing high-level board meetings that fundamentally redefined media ownership. The G-Unit mogul's silence became deafening, intentionally framing Ross's loud, diamond-flashing podcast appearances not as a show of true strength, but as the chaotic, desperate thrashing of a legacy artist realization that his cultural leverage is slowly evaporating. 50 Cent's digital apparatus continued to let the archives do the talking, ensuring that every time a user searched for Rick Ross, they were greeted by the unshakable image of a man cutting his own grass while his private jet sat grounded thousands of miles away. Faced with this passive-aggressive economic strangulation, Ross attempted one final, massive reclamation of his biggest boss identity by pivoting hard toward the streets that birthed his persona. In an aggressive string of midnight social media dispatches, Ross explicitly challenged 50 Cent's corporate backing, calling out the major streaming networks and daring them to publish the actual back-end ownership percentages of the true television masters. He attempted to rally independent young creators under his banner, reframing his own financial model as a pure, uncompromised form of black capitalism that refuses to bow to Hollywood distribution infrastructure. Yet, the strategy faced immediate friction, as fans quickly pointed out the deep irony of a man screaming for corporate independence while simultaneously begging the public to validate his wealth through mainstream brand metrics. The final breaking point arrived when the financial war crossed paths with physical geography, as rumors began circulating that 50 Cent was actively planning to bring his highly lucrative, star-studded custom car show directly to Atlanta, encroaching heavily onto the southeastern territory that Ross has long claimed as his personal kingdom. The mere threat of 50 Cent's corporate machine setting up shop down the street from the Promised Land estate sent the internet into an absolute frenzy, with local promotional teams and street figures forced to subtly choose sides in a proxy war that threatened to disrupt the regional entertainment economy. Ross immediately responded by attempting to outflex the impending invasion, announcing an overnight expansion of his own automotive showcases and demanding that his rival bring whatever luxury vehicles he owned out into the open sun to be judged by real collectors. This explosive collision of ego, capital, and historical grievance has elevated their 15-year conflict far beyond the standard parameters of a rap beef. It has become a permanent, living case study in the weaponization of digital perception, proving that in the modern era, an unconfirmed viral photograph can inflict far more structural damage on an empire than a traditional lyrical diss track ever could. The carefully curated, flawless illusion of an untouchable rap dynasty has been permanently replaced by a raw, unpredictable human drama where every luxury purchase is scrutinized for signs of debt, and every domestic chore is analyzed as a potential financial crisis. As the digital dust finally begins to settle over this turbulent chapter, the fundamental reality of the Carter-level empire remains unchanged. The absolute truth of their bank accounts will never outpace the narrative power of a perfectly timed internet meme. Whether Rick Ross's private jet genuinely returns to the sky with its $500,000 Starlink upgrade intact, or 50 Cent successfully executes the total economic dismantling of his rival's public persona, the hip-hop community has been permanently changed by the warfare. They are no longer just consumers of music, they are active witnesses to a relentless, psychological war of attrition where the final currency isn't gold, platinum records, or real estate, but the absolute control of the public imagination.